Lord Whitmore's quill scratched across parchment like a death sentence being written. Margaret pressed against the study door, her trembling fingers clutching the carved wood as her father's voice cut through mahogany panels. "The Apache chief demands proof of our sincerity," the Indian agent said. "A gesture of trust. Then he shall have it." Her father's tone held the same dispassion he used when selling cattle. "My daughter, Margaret, her substantial frame should convince them we give generously." The world tilted. Margaret's knees buckled, her mother's silver mirror slipping from her pocket, shattering against marble floor. The sound drew silence. Then footsteps. The door opened. Her father's eyes held no warmth, only calculation. "Finally," he said, studying her tear-stained face with satisfaction. "Your unfortunate size serves a purpose. You leave at dawn." Through the window, desert mountains loomed like prison walls. Tomorrow, she would cross into Apache territory as human currency in her father's cold transaction. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. The wagon wheels groaned against red earth, each rotation carrying Margaret deeper into Apache territory. The cavalry escort rode with rifles across their saddles, their faces grim beneath broad-brimmed hats. She clutched her mother's prayer book, its worn leather cover damp with perspite from her palms. 3 days since leaving Fort Buchanan. 3 days of her father's final words echoing, "Your size finally serves a purpose." The Apache camp appeared suddenly beyond a ridge of mesquite and ocotillo. Wickiups dotted the landscape like earthen bells, their bare grass coverings golden in afternoon sun. Smoke rose from cooking fires, carrying unfamiliar scents of mesquite and roasting meat. Women paused in their work. Children peered from behind their mothers' skirts. The silence felt heavy as summer thunder. Margaret expected chains. She expected to be thrown to the ground, beaten, worse. Instead, a man emerged from the largest dwelling. He moved with quiet authority, his presence commanding without ostentation. Unlike the decorated war chiefs from her father's stereoscopic cards, he wore simple doeskin shirt and Mexican silver conchos. His dark eyes held intelligence that seemed to see through her terror to something deeper. "Miss Whitmore." His English carried only slight accent, each word carefully chosen. "I am Nietzsche. You are not trade. You are guest until you choose otherwise." The words made no sense. She was payment, a peace offering. Her father had been explicit. The cavalry captain cleared his throat, eager to complete his duty and leave. Papers exchanged hands, official seals glinting. Then the soldiers were mounting, riding away, leaving her standing in foreign dust with only her small trunk and shattered expectations. Nietzsche gestured to a woman whose gray-streaked hair was bound with strips of red cloth. "Corn flour will show you where you rest." The wickiup provided was small but clean, with turkey feather blankets folded neatly on a bed of pine boughs. Her trunk looked absurd against the earthen simplicity. Through the opening, she could see the camp returning to routine. Women resumed grinding corn on stone metates, their rhythm hypnotic. Men worked on arrows. Children played with dolls made of yucca fiber. That first night, she lay rigid on unfamiliar bedding, every sound threatening. Coyotes called from distant ridges. Voices murmured in Apache around dying fires. She pressed her mother's prayer book against her chest, wondering if morning would bring the violence everyone at Fort Buchanan had whispered about. When dawn came, painting the desert pink and gold, she found water in a decorated gourd outside her entrance. Beside it, clothing, a simple doeskin dress, nothing like her crushing corsets and heavy woolens. She stared at the garments, understanding the choice they represented. Her old life had already ended. The question was what would begin. Nietzsche appeared as she emerged, still wearing her English dress but having drunk the offered water. His expression showed neither approval nor disappointment, only patience. "The desert teaches many things," he said, gesturing to the vast landscape beyond the camp. "First lesson is hardest, learning to listen instead of fear. A child ran past, pausing to stare at her with open curiosity. The little girl said something in Apache that made nearby women laugh. Not cruel laughter like she'd known in Boston society, but something lighter, almost welcoming. Cornflower approached with a burden basket, demonstrating how to hold it, though Margaret's soft hands couldn't grasp the weight properly. "Tomorrow," Cornflower said in careful English. "Today, you watch, learn." As the sun climbed higher, Margaret found herself seated near the communal cooking area. No one forced her to work, but neither was she isolated. Women moved around her with purpose, occasionally offering small teachings, this plant for flavor, that technique for preserving. Their words were mostly Apache, but their gestures were universal. When evening brought the community together around a central fire, Nietzsche appeared at her side. "Your father spoke of you as burden." His voice carried no judgment, merely observation. "Here, we see differently. Every person has worth beyond what eyes first see." Margaret's throat tightened. In all her 23 years, no one had suggested she might have value beyond her failed marriage's prospects and embarrassing size. The firelight danced across faces that regarded her with curiosity rather than disgust. An elderly man began telling a story in Apache, his hands painting pictures in smoke and shadow. Children leaned forward, enraptured. Though she understood no words, the rhythm felt oddly soothing. That night, she returned to her wickiup with strange sensations stirring beneath her fear. The desert air carried sage and wood smoke. Stars blazed in patterns she'd never noticed from her father's estate. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt something that might have been possibility. Lying on the pine bough bed, she opened her mother's prayer book. Pressed between pages was a dried rose from her mother's garden. Its petals had darkened but retained their shape, preserved despite everything. Perhaps she too could survive transformation. Perhaps this exile might become something else entirely. Outside, an owl called, and the desert answered with its chorus of night sounds. Margaret closed her eyes, surprised to find her terror had softened to something more like anticipation. Tomorrow would bring more lessons. Tonight, for the first time in years, she didn't pray for disappearance but for strength to become whatever this new world might allow. Margaret woke to find the doeskin dress laid carefully across her trunk, along with soft moccasins beaded with geometric patterns. For 3 days, she'd clung to her English clothing, the heavy wool and whalebone stays of familiar prison, but this morning, sweat already beaded her skin despite the early hour, and the corset felt like it might crack her ribs with each breath. With trembling fingers, she unlaced the punishing garment. The doeskin slipped over her body like water, soft and forgiving. No crushing structure, no need to hold her breath. She could bend, reach, move. In her mother's mirror fragment, a stranger looked back, sun-touched skin, loosened hair, eyes wide with something between fear and wonder. Nietzsche waited outside, patient as stone. His gaze took in her changed appearance without comment, though something in his expression softened. "Today, the desert begins teaching," he said, handing her a woven basket. "We gather what earth provides." They walked beyond the camp, toward stands of mesquite and palo verde. Other women moved through the landscape with purpose, their baskets filling steadily. Margaret stumbled over rocks, her soft feet unused to rough terrain even through moccasins. Thorns caught at the doeskin, leaving tiny pulls in the hide. "Here," Nietzsche knelt beside a sprawling prickly pear cactus. "The fruit feeds us, but demands respect." He showed her how to use a split stick to harvest the red-purple tunas, avoiding the near-invisible glauchids that could torment for days. "Your people see danger. We see opportunity." Margaret's first attempt sent fruit tumbling into dirt. The second landed properly in her basket, and Nietzsche's slight nod felt like highest praise. They moved through the morning, his patient voice identifying each plant: four-wing saltbush for seasoning, juniper berries for medicine, desert marigold for dye. "The desert teaches patience to those who listen," he said, demonstrating how to read which mesquite pods were ready for harvest. Hurry brings hunger. Patience brings plenty. By midday, her basket held a modest collection. Back at camp, Cornflower gestured her toward the metates, where women ground mesquite beans into flour. The stone felt foreign beneath her palms, the circular motion harder than it looked. Her soft hands, accustomed only to needlework and piano keys, couldn't find the rhythm. The beans scattered, bouncing across packed earth. Children giggled, pointing at the white woman's clumsiness. But their laughter held no malice, the same gentle amusement they'd show at a puppy learning to walk. One little girl, perhaps 6 years old, demonstrated the proper motion with exaggerated care, her small hands guiding Margaret's. "Like this," the child said in broken English. "Round, round, like sun." On the third attempt, coarse flour began forming beneath the grinding stone. Cornflower made an approving sound, adding Margaret's small portion to the communal supply without separation. The gesture spoke volumes. Her contribution, however meager, belonged with theirs. The afternoon brought basket weaving lessons. Yucca fibers had been soaking in water, now pliable but still tough. Margaret watched Cornflower's weathered hands work with stunning efficiency, creating tight coils that would hold water when lined with pine pitch. Her own attempts were disasters. The fibers split, refused to hold shape, left her fingers raw and bleeding where they rubbed against the coarse material. She was ready to apologize, to retreat in shame, when Cornflower took her damaged hands with unexpected gentleness. The older woman examined the cuts, then produced a salve that smelled of sage and animal fat. As she worked it into Margaret's palms, she spoke in slow, careful English. "All hands bleed first time. Apache girls, white women, same. Bleeding means learning." She adjusted Margaret's grip on the fibers, showing a slightly different angle. "Your fingers are soft now. Will grow strong. Like you." The correction was minor but changed everything. The fibers began cooperating, forming loose but recognizable coils. It would never hold water, might barely hold dried beans, but it was undeniably a basket. Cornflower set it beside the others to dry, treating it with same care as the masterworks nearby. Evening brought the community together around the central fire. Women had spent hours preparing the mezcal, lining pits with hot stones, the agave hearts roasting until tender and sweet. Margaret sat where Cornflower indicated, not segregated but simply another member of the circle. When the cooked agave was distributed, she received her portion like everyone else. The taste surprised her, sweet and smoky. Nothing like the bland porridges and overcooked roasts of her father's table. She ate slowly, savoring both flavor and inclusion. Around her, conversations flowed in Apache, occasionally punctuated by laughter. An old woman told what was obviously a humorous story, her hands animated, sending children into fits of giggles. Nietzsche appeared at her side as stars emerged. "You did well today." "I failed at everything," Margaret said, displaying her bandaged fingers. "The grinding, the weaving." "You tried everything," he corrected. "Failure is the path to learning. You didn't give up." A young mother nearby shifted her baby to her other hip, the movement natural and unself-conscious. Margaret watched, remembering how her father would make her stand behind curtains when visitors came, hiding his embarrassment. Here, bodies were simply bodies, tools for survival, vessels for souls, worthy of respect regardless of shape. "You're women," she began carefully. "They don't seem to notice." Nietzsche followed her gaze to the varied forms around the fire, some thin, some rounded, some bent with age, all valued. The desert cares nothing for appearance. Only strength, wisdom, kindness matter. A shallow stream may sparkle, but deep waters sustain life. Later, in her wickiup, Margaret examined her transformed hands. Blisters rose beside cuts, dirt embedded beneath nails that had once been meticulously manicured. They looked nothing like a lady's hands. They looked like hands that were learning to work, to contribute, to belong. She thought of her father's last garden party, where she'd hidden behind potted palms, watching other daughters dance. Lady Pemberton had whispered, loud enough to carry, "Such a shame about the Whitmore girl, all that weight, like she's trying to fill the space of 2 daughters." But today, grinding beside Apache women, her size had been irrelevant. What mattered was the motion, the contribution, the willingness to learn. No one mentioned her body, neither to criticize nor console. It simply was, like the desert mountains, present, substantial, part of the landscape. Through the wiki-up opening, she could see the last glow of firelight. Someone was singing, a low melody that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Tomorrow would bring more failures, more lessons, more small victories. Her fingers traced the outline of her clumsy basket, feeling the uneven weave that marked her first attempt at creation rather than mere existence. For 23 years, she'd tried to disappear, to take up less space, to apologize for existing. Tonight, for the first time, she wondered what it might feel like to simply be. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Outside, an owl called, and she found herself listening for its meaning rather than fearing its sound. Perhaps Nietzsche was right. Perhaps the desert was already teaching her to listen instead of fear. 6 weeks had passed since Margaret arrived in the Apache camp, and the desert had begun reshaping her in ways she never imagined. Her hands, once soft as butter, now bore calluses from grinding stone and basket weaving. The sun had darkened her skin to honey brown, and her hair, freed from pins and pomades, fell in waves past her shoulders. But the greatest change was invisible, the growing seed of confidence that sprouted with each small success. This morning, cornflower woke her before dawn. "Medicine gathering," the older woman said, handing Margaret a specialized basket woven tight enough to hold seeds. "You come?" They joined a group of women moving into the hills, their feet sure on paths Margaret was only beginning to recognize. The eldest, a woman named Whiteshell, whose face mapped decades of desert life, led them toward a grove of willow trees marking a hidden spring. As they walked, she spoke in a mixture of Apache and English, ensuring Margaret understood. "This place, sacred for healing plants. We take only what's needed. Leave roots strong for next season." Whiteshell demonstrated proper harvesting technique with reverent care. "Each plant has spirit. We ask permission. Give thanks." Margaret knelt beside a cluster of desert sage, her fingers gentle as she selected mature stems. The aromatic leaves released their scent, sharp and cleansing. She'd learned this plant eased breathing troubles, could purify wounds, calm anxious spirits. As she worked, she found herself murmuring thanks as the women did, the practice no longer feeling foreign. "Good," Whiteshell noted, examining Margaret's harvest. "You learn to see which plants are strongest. This one," she indicated a particularly robust sage, "will make powerful medicine." They gathered through the morning willow bark for fever, snakeweed for stomach troubles, creosote for joint pain. Margaret's basket filled steadily, each plant carefully separated. When young Blessing, barely 14, cut herself on sharp rocks, Margaret reacted without thinking. She cleaned the wound with water from her gourd, applied crushed sage leaves, and bound it with a strip torn from her underskirt. The women exchanged approving glances. "Soft hands learns quick," Cornflower said, using the nickname they'd given her. It had started as gentle teasing about her inexperience, but lately carried warmth, almost affection. As they returned to camp, Nietzsche appeared on the ridge above, his presence commanding even at distance. He descended with fluid grace, his eyes finding Margaret among the women. "The clouds speak of change," he said, gesturing to the western sky where wisps of white gathered. "Come, I'll teach you to read their language." They walked to a flat stone overlooking the valley, where he pointed to various cloud formations. These high, thin clouds, ice clouds, Mean weather changes in 2, 3 days. But see there, he indicated lower, darker masses building along mountains. Those bring rain today, maybe tonight. Margaret studied the sky with new attention. In Boston, we simply waited for rain or didn't. I never thought to read its approach. Everything speaks if you know how to listen. Wind direction, behavior of animals, smell of air. He picked up a handful of dust, letting it drift. Wind from south brings moisture. From north, dry cold. Your people have instruments to measure. We have generations of watching. As if to prove his point, the wind shifted, carrying the distinct scent of rain on desert earth, petrichor, though she didn't know the word. By afternoon, fat drops began falling, sending children dancing through camp with delighted shrieks. Margaret stood in the downpour, face tilted skyward. Doesn't dress clinging but not confining like wet wool would have been. That evening, with the rain past and earth steaming, the camp prepared a communal feast. A successful hunt had brought deer, and the women worked together transforming it into a meal for everyone. Margaret found herself stationed at the grinding stones with 3 other women, crushing dried corn for flatbread. The rhythm had become second nature now. Circular motion, steady pressure, finding the pace that matched the others. They sang as they worked, a repetitive melody that helped maintain tempo. Margaret hummed along, not knowing words but feeling the cadence in her bones. Young Flower, working beside her, made a joke in Apache that sent the others into peals of laughter. Then she repeated it in broken English for Margaret. Something about a rabbit trying to court a hawk, absurd and hilarious. Margaret found herself laughing, really laughing, her whole body shaking with genuine mirth. The sound surprised her. When had she last laughed without covering her mouth, without worrying how it made her look? There! Young Flower exclaimed. Soft Hands knows how to laugh proper now. Not little bird chirps like white women make. Real laughter from belly. This sent them off again, and Margaret couldn't stop. Tears streamed down her face, but they were tears of joy, of release, of belonging. She was grinding corn with Apache women. Her dress was doeskin, her feet were bare, and she was laughing with her whole self for the first time since her mother died. Nietzsche appeared, drawn by the commotion. His usual stoic expression cracked into something approaching a smile. What causes such happiness? Young Flower tried to explain about the rabbit and hawk, but collapsed into giggles halfway through. Margaret attempted to help but found herself equally overcome. Finally, Cornflower managed. Soft Hands learned to laugh like Apache woman. Big medicine. That night, as they shared the feast, Margaret sat in her usual place, no longer the edges but integrated into the circle. She helped serve, ensuring elders and children ate first, a protocol she'd learned without being explicitly taught. When old Standing Bear complimented the cornbread, Cornflower pointed to Margaret. Soft Hands ground half the corn, getting strong. Standing Bear nodded approvingly, switching to English for her benefit. You learn our ways quick. Good hands for work, good heart for people. Later, she found herself teaching a group of children an English counting game, using pebbles and marks in the dirt. They repeated numbers after her, giggling at the strange sounds. One little boy, barely 5, climbed into her lap without hesitation, and she felt something crack open in her chest. When had she become safe enough for children to seek comfort from as the fire died to embers? Families began drifting to their dwellings. Nietzsche walked with her toward her wickiup, their pace unhurried. The silence between them had shifted over weeks from awkward to comfortable. You're different, he observed. Not just outside. Inside, too. Margaret considered this. I spent my whole life trying to be smaller, quieter, less visible. Here, no one asks me to diminish myself. Why would we? Each person has their own strengths. Yours are becoming clear. Steady hands for medicine, patience with children, quick mind for learning. He paused at her dwelling entrance. Your father was fooled to see only surface. The words shouldn't have meant so much, but they lodged deep in her chest like heat. She thought of her father's constant disapproval, his sighs when she entered rooms, his comments about her appetite, her size, her failure to attract suitors. Here, she ate when hungry, worked when needed, rested when tired. Her body was simply her body, neither praised nor shamed, merely accepted as the vessel that carried her spirit. Your mother, Nietzsche said suddenly. She would be proud of who you're becoming. Margaret's throat tightened. You didn't know her. No, but I see her in you. The kindness you show, the strength you're finding. These were seeds she planted. Desert sun and rain just helping them grow. He left her then, but his words lingered. In her wickiup. Margaret lit a small oil lamp, one of the few trade goods she used, and examined her transformed hands in its glow. The cuts had healed, leaving faint scars. Her palms were rough, nails short and practical. They looked nothing like the ornamental hands of a Boston lady. She pulled out her mother's prayer book, something she hadn't opened in weeks. Pressed flowers fell from between pages, not just the rose from her mother's garden, but new additions. Desert marigold picked her first week here, sage from today's gathering, a sprig of juniper Nietzsche had absently handed her while teaching plant identification. Tomorrow, Whiteshell would begin teaching her more complex medicines. Next week, she'd help with her first birthing attendance. Small Dove was close to her time, and Cornflower had said Margaret's steady hands would be useful. The thought that they trusted her with something so sacred made her chest swell with emotion she couldn't name. Through the wickiup opening, stars blazed in patterns she was learning to recognize. Nietzsche had taught her Apache names for constellations, stories different from Greek myths, but equally rich. She found the one he'd shown her last night, the basket carrier, a woman's figure holding gathered blessings above her head. Margaret touched the bundle of sage drying from her ceiling poles. In Boston. She'd been a burden, an embarrassment, a problem without solution. Here, she was becoming something else. Medicine woman in training, teacher of children, contributing member of a community that saw her worth beyond her size. The transformation wasn't complete. She still caught herself hunching shoulders to appear smaller, still sometimes reached for corsets that no longer existed. But each day, the desert and its people carved away another piece of the shame she'd carried like stones in her chest. Each day, she could breathe a little deeper, laugh a little louder, exist a little more fully. Tomorrow would bring new lessons, new challenges, new small victories. Tonight, she fell asleep to the sound of desert wind and distant singing, her rough hands folded over her heart, feeling for the first time in memory something that might have been peace. The full moon rose like a silver dollar over the desert, casting shadows sharp enough to read by. Margaret sat beside Nietzsche on the flat rock that had become their teaching place, a collection of dried plants spread between them on a blanket. 3 months had passed since her arrival, and these evening lessons had evolved from survival instruction to something deeper, more intimate. This one, she held up a sprig of dried thyme from her mother's garden seeds she'd carried in her trunk. We call thyme, but see, she placed it beside a native desert plant. Almost identical properties to your mountain bee balm. Both ease breathing, calm stomach troubles. Nietzsche examined both plants with interest. Your medicine and ours, not so different. Different names, same healing. He paused, his expression shifting to something more distant. My first wife, Morning Star, she knew all the plant medicines, taught me before. He stopped, jaw tightening. Margaret waited, having learned that silence could be invitation. The desert had taught her patience, and Nietzsche had taught her that some stories needed their own time to emerge. Soldiers came to our winter camp 4 winters ago, he finally continued, his voice steady but weighted. Said we'd violated treaty boundaries, though we'd camped there since before my grandfather's time. Morning Star was gathering medicine plants by the stream when shooting started. She ran toward the children, trying to protect them. His hands clenched, released. Soldiers see running Apache woman. Assume threat. She died holding juniper berries for her sister's fever. Margaret's chest constricted. I'm sorry. The loss. Loss is part of living. But waste, needless death from fear and ignorance, that burns like poison. He picked up a juniper sprig, rolling it between his fingers. After, I wanted war, blood for blood. But Morning Star's father, he was wise, said, war brings more graves, not justice. Try another path. So I became chief who speaks for peace, though many call me weak for it. Not weak, Margaret said firmly. My father commanded through fear and force. You lead through wisdom and strength. There's more courage in choosing peace when everyone expects war. Naichi studied her face in the moonlight. You understand more than most. Tell me of your mother. You carry her sadness like stones. Margaret hadn't spoken of this to anyone, but under the vast desert sky, words came easier. She died when I was 14, wasting sickness, though I think heartbreak played its part. Father had mistresses, made no secret of his disappointments, no son, only a daughter who grew too large to be marriageable. Mother tried to make herself smaller, eat less, take up less space. She thought if she became delicate enough, he might love her again. Her voice caught. After she died, Father said I'd eaten away my grief, that I was swelling with the shame of our family. Every pound I gained was proof of my weakness, my failure to honor her memory through self-discipline. He paraded me at social events like a cautionary tale, then sent me to stand behind curtains when important guests arrived. He was blind, Naichi said with quiet intensity. In Apache way, women who survive grief, who carry strength through sorrow, these are the backbones of our people. Your size speaks of endurance, not weakness, like mountains that endure all weather. The comparison stunned her. Mountains, permanent, powerful, necessary. Not something to hide or diminish, but something that shaped the very landscape. She felt tears threaten and blinked them back. Peace costs more than war, Naichi continued, returning to his earlier thought. War is simple, anger released, blood spilled, victory or death. Peace requires swallowing rage, finding common ground with those who've wronged you, protecting your people through patience instead of power. Many warriors think I betray Apache way, choosing treaties over battles. But your people are alive, Margaret pointed out. Fed, sheltered, together. How is that betrayal? You see clear. Others see only what we've lost. Land, freedom to roam, old ways dying. He gestured to the camp below where oil lamps mixed with traditional fires. Change comes whether we fight or not. Question is, do we guide change or let it destroy us? The next morning, Margaret was teaching letters to a group of eager children, drawing in the smooth sand she'd prepared near the central fire. The Apache had no written language, relying on oral tradition and pictographs. But several parents had requested she teach English letters and numbers, knowing their children would need these tools in the changing world. A is for apple. She drew the letter carefully, then sketched a simple apple beside it. But also for acorn, antelope, arrow, little singing bird. The 5-year-old who'd claimed Margaret as his special friend traced the letter with intense concentration. A for Apache, he asked hopefully. Yes, A for Apache, Margaret confirmed, and the children repeated it, their voices mixing English and Apache accents into something entirely new. Naichi observed from nearby, ostensibly working on arrow points but clearly watching the lesson. When the children dispersed for morning chores, he approached. You're good with them. Patient but firm. They respect you. They're eager learners. So different from the forced lessons I endured. She smoothed the sand, erasing the morning's work. My governess used to rap my knuckles if my penmanship wasn't perfect. These children learn because they want to, not because they fear punishment. Best learning comes from curiosity, not fear, Naichi agreed. He hesitated, then added, Morning Star couldn't have children. Great sadness for us both, seeing you with little ones. He trailed off, but his meaning was clear. That afternoon, urgent summons came. Small Dove's labor had begun early, and Cornflower needed help. Margaret grabbed the medicine bundle she'd been preparing and ran to the birthing shelter, a special wickiup set apart for women's medicine. Small Dove was young, barely 17, and terrified. This was her first child, and the baby was positioned wrong. Cornflower's face showed concern, though her voice remained calm. Baby is turned. Need to convince it to move. Margaret had assisted with 2 births now. But this was different, complicated, dangerous. She remembered her mother's friend who'd died in childbirth when the baby wouldn't turn. But she also remembered Whiteshell's teachings about pressure points and positioning. Let me try, she said, washing her hands with the boiled water always kept ready. She placed her hands on Small Dove's swollen belly, feeling for the baby's position. There, the head, up near the ribs instead of down. Speaking soothingly in the Apache phrases she'd learned, she began the gentle but firm manipulation Whiteshell had shown her. Small Dove cried out, gripping Margaret's free hand hard enough to leave marks. But Margaret kept her voice steady, singing the birthing song Cornflower had taught her, applying steady pressure. She felt the moment the baby shifted, turning like a swimmer diving deep. Good, good, Cornflower exclaimed. Now baby comes right way. The labor progressed quickly after that. Margaret stayed at Small Dove's head, letting her squeeze her hands through contractions, singing the old songs that seemed to help women find their strength. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy girl with strong lungs, Small Dove pulled Margaret down to embrace her. You saved us, she whispered. Baby and me both. Word spread quickly through camp. That evening, several women approached Margaret with small gifts. Beaded hair ties, a precious steel needle, dried berries. Whiteshell herself came, placing a necklace of juniper berries around Margaret's neck. You have medicine hands now, the elder said formally. Not just learning, but knowing. We trust you with our lives. As the camp settled for the night, Naichi found her sitting outside her wickiup, overwhelmed by the day's events. He sat beside her, closer than usual propriety would allow. You did powerful thing today. Small Dove's husband speaks your name with reverence. The women say you have gift. I was terrified, Margaret admitted. If I'd failed. But you didn't. You used knowledge, instinct, courage. This is who you are, not what your father said. He picked up her hand, examining the nail marks from Small Dove's grip. Your kindness speaks louder than words. Your strength shows in service, not size. His thumb traced the marks gently, and Margaret felt her breath catch. This was different from gratitude or friendship. This was something that made her skin warm and heart race in ways that had nothing to do with desert heat. Above them, stars emerged in familiar patterns. Naichi pointed to Orion, still holding her hand. Your people see a hunter there. We see the journey home. 3 stars are 3 mountains that guide lost travelers back to their people. What if home isn't a place you're from, but a place you choose? Margaret asked. Then you're already home, he replied, his fingers interlacing with hers. The desert has claimed you. The people have accepted you. You belong here as much as any born to this land. They sat in silence, hands joined, watching stars wheel overhead. Margaret thought of the woman who'd arrived here months ago, terrified, ashamed, certain of her worthlessness. That woman was fading like morning mist, replaced by someone who delivered babies, taught children, gathered medicines, and laughed without covering her mouth. Your mother, Naichi said suddenly. She would recognize you still, but she'd see what you've become. Strong like mountains, gentle like rain, necessary like sunrise. Margaret squeezed his hand, unable to speak past the emotion in her throat. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt seen, not her body, not her failures, but her true self. In Naichi's eyes, she glimpsed a reflection that had nothing to do with mirrors and everything to do with worth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons. But tonight, under the teaching moon with her hand in his, Margaret felt the last chains of her father's judgment beginning to break. She was becoming someone her mother would have been proud to know, someone she herself was beginning to respect. The transformation wasn't just about surviving in the desert anymore. It was about choosing to thrive, to love, to belong. And in that choice, she was finally, truly coming home. Coming. Spring arrived in the desert like a miracle, transforming brown earth into a canvas of color. Palo Verde trees burst into yellow bloom, and carpets of Mexican gold poppies stretched toward the mountains. The Apache camp buzzed with preparation for the spring festival, a celebration of renewal that Margaret had only heard about in stories. "Soft hands come help," Young Flower called, her arms full of fresh-cut willow branches. The women were constructing the ceremonial shelter where dancing would take place, weaving branches into intricate patterns that would provide shade while letting spring breeze flow through. Margaret had been fully accepted into the women's work circle now. 5 months after her arrival, her suggestions were valued, her hands trusted with important tasks. She helped stretch fresh deer hide over the frame, the work familiar now, her movements confident. "Tonight, you dance," Cornflower announced, bringing out a special dress she'd been working on in secret. It was doeskin like Margaret's daily wear, but decorated with elaborate beadwork, blue and white patterns that resembled both Apache designs and the morning glories from her mother's garden. "We make this for you. Apache design, but also your flowers. You are both now." Margaret's throat tightened as she accepted the gift. The hours of work it represented, the thought behind combining both cultures. It was more than a dress. It was acceptance, belonging, love. As afternoon approached, concerning news spread through camp. The spring rains had been weak, barely enough to dampen earth. The usual water sources were running low, and the corn planted 2 weeks ago showed signs of stress. In a climate where water meant life, drought threatened everything. Naichi called a council meeting, and surprisingly, gestured for Margaret to attend. She sat with the women elders, listening as scouts reported on dry springs and diminishing streams. The situation was serious. Without adequate water, the corn would fail, and they'd face hunger by winter. "We could move camp," one elder suggested. "Find better water. Moving means exposing ourselves, maybe violating treaty boundaries." Naichi countered. "Soldiers look for any excuse." Margaret remembered something from her father's agricultural journals, volumes she'd read out of boredom during long Boston winters. She raised her hand slightly, the gesture still feeling presumptuous. Naichi nodded encouragement. "In England, farmers discovered that planting certain crops together helps preserve moisture," she said, her voice steady despite the attention focused on her. "Beans planted with corn provide shade for soil, keeping water from evaporating. Squash leaves spread wide, acting like natural mulch." Old Standing Bear frowned. "We've always planted corn in rows, beans separate." "The Three Sisters method," Margaret continued, remembering the term. "Some Eastern tribes use it. Each plant helps the others. Corn provides poles for beans to climb. Beans add nutrients to soil. Squash protects both. Together they use less water than apart." Murmurs rippled through the council. It was unconventional, mixing traditional Apache ways with outside knowledge. But the drought was real, and conventional methods weren't enough. "We could try small section," Naichi suggested diplomatically. "Test this Three Sisters. If it fails, we lose little. If it works..." The vote was close, but Margaret's suggestion passed. Over the next 2 days, she worked alongside others, replanting a portion of the corn with beans and squash seeds she'd preserved. The work was hard under the strengthening sun, but the community pulled together, even skeptics helping for the good of all. By the evening of the spring festival, cautious optimism had replaced immediate worry. The celebration could proceed, though prayers for rain would be especially fervent. Margaret bathed in the stream's diminished flow, then donned her gifted dress. The beadwork caught fading sunlight, creating patterns that seemed to dance independently. The celebration began at sunset with blessing songs led by the elderly medicine man, Grandfather Crow. Sacred pollen was scattered to the four directions. Prayers offered in Apache that Margaret now partially understood. Children ran between adults' legs, excited by the break from routine. The air smelled of roasting venison and fry bread, sage smoke and spring flowers. When the round dance began, Margaret held back, uncertain despite her invitation to participate. The dance involved concentric circles, men in one, women in another, moving in opposite directions to drumbeat rhythm. It looked complex, intimidating. Nietzsche appeared at her elbow. "Dance with us," he said simply, but his eyes held deeper invitation. She joined the women's circle, finding place between cornflower and young flower. The steps were simpler than they'd appeared. Step, step, slight hop, repeat. The drum governed everything, its heartbeat rhythm impossible to resist. As the circles moved, she passed Nietzsche repeatedly, their eyes meeting each time. Then came the partner dance, where circles broke and pairs formed. Nietzsche moved toward her with intention that made her pulse quicken. His hands took hers, warm and calloused, steady as the man himself. They moved together, her initial clumsiness smoothing as he guided her through the patterns. "You learn quickly," he murmured, close enough that his breath stirred her hair. "I have an excellent teacher," she replied, surprised by her own boldness. The dance required them to part and reunite, mirror each other's movements, come together in brief moments of contact before spinning away. Each return felt like homecoming, each separation like loss. Margaret became aware of nothing but Nietzsche, his graceful movements, the way firelight bronzed his skin, the slight smile that had replaced his usual stoic expression. Around them, the community celebrated with abandon. Old couples who'd danced together for decades moved with practiced harmony. Young warriors showed off for giggling girls. Children attempted to copy adults, their uncoordinated efforts drawing fond laughter. But for Margaret, the world had narrowed to the space between her and Nietzsche, the electric awareness where their hands touched. The dance ended with pairs standing close, hands joined, foreheads nearly touching. Margaret could feel Nietzsche's breath, see gold flecks in his dark eyes she'd never noticed before. Time seemed suspended, the moment stretching like spun honey. "Margaret," he began, her English name sounding foreign but intimate on his lips. His hand rose toward her face, and she leaned into the anticipated touch. "Chief Nietzsche." A scout burst into the celebration circle, chest heaving from hard running. "Soldiers approach from the east, maybe 20. They have important man with them, not military." The spell shattered. Nietzsche stepped back, chief once again rather than dance partner. He questioned the scout rapidly in Apache, then turned to Margaret with expression she couldn't read. "The important man is white, older, claims authority from Washington. He demands counsel tomorrow." Nietzsche paused. "He has bright red hair turning gray, wears expensive clothes." Margaret's stomach dropped. Red hair like flame, now fading to ash. Her father. The celebration continued around them, but subdued now, worried conversations replacing laughter. Nietzsche walked Margaret to her wickiup, tension radiating from his controlled movements. "It's him, isn't it?" he asked quietly. "Your father comes. After 5 months. Why now?" Margaret's mind raced. "He said I was dead to him, worth more as trade than daughter. Perhaps he regrets. Perhaps he seeks to reclaim you." Nietzsche's jaw tightened. "Question is, what do you want?" The question hung between them. Months ago, she might have jumped at any chance to return to civilization, to resume her place even if that place was shame-filled. But now, she looked at her work-roughened hands, felt the beaded dress against her skin, remembered the trust in small Dove's eyes as she delivered her baby. She thought of children learning letters in sand, of women teaching her their songs, of the small basket of medicines she'd gathered with her own knowledge. Most of all, she thought of the dance, of Naichi's hands in hers, of almost kisses and possibility. "I don't know," she admitted honestly. "Depends what he wants, what he offers." Naichi nodded slowly. "Tomorrow brings answers. Tonight, you should rest, think clearly." But sleep wouldn't come. Margaret lay on her pine bough bed, staring at wickiup poles above her. Through the smoke hole, stars wheeled in their eternal patterns. The same stars that had watched her arrive in terror now witnessed her confusion. She rose and walked to the field where they'd planted the three sisters combination. Even in moonlight, she could see tiny green shoots emerging, beans already beginning their climb up cornstalks. It might work. Her idea, her contribution to the community's survival. "Can't sleep either." Naichi's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him looking less composed than usual, his hair loose from its usual binding. "Too many thoughts," she said. He moved closer, and she caught his scent. Sage smoke, leather, something uniquely him. "Whatever comes tomorrow, know this: you have place here, not as trade, not as guest, but as one of us. The people respect you, trust you." He paused, then added more quietly, "I more than respect you." Before she could respond, he touched her face as he'd intended to during the dance. His fingers were gentle, tracing the line where tears had fallen that first night, now following the curve of a cheek lifted in frequent laughter. "Your father was fool," he said firmly. "He threw away treasure because he couldn't see past surface. His blindness brought you to us, so perhaps I should thank him. But if he hurts you again, treaty or no treaty, I will not stand aside." Margaret covered his hand with hers, holding it against her cheek. "I'm not the same woman he discarded. That woman believed she was worthless. This woman knows better." "Yes," Naichi agreed. "This woman saves babies, teaches children, brings new knowledge to old problems. This woman dances like spring wind and makes strong chief forget his dignity." He smiled slightly. "This woman is loved, if she chooses to be." The word hung between them, powerful as thunder. Love. Not gratitude for her sacrifice, not pity for her situation, but love for who she'd become. Dawn would bring confrontation, choice, possible transformation yet again. But here in the darkness between days, standing in a field where three sisters grew stronger together than apart, Margaret felt the truth settle into her bones. She was no longer between worlds. She had found hers. Tomorrow her father would arrive with his power, his soldiers, his assumptions, but he would find not the daughter he'd discarded, but a woman transformed by desert and community into something he'd never understand. Someone worthy of love, someone capable of choosing her own path, someone finally, fully, free. The military convoy arrived at mid-morning, dust clouds announcing their approach long before the soldiers came into view. 20 cavalry troops in Union blue, their Spencer rifles glinting in desert sun, formed a protective square around a civilian wagon bearing the Indian Affairs Bureau seal. Margaret stood with the other women, her heart hammering against her ribs as she recognized the figure stepping down from the wagon with practiced authority. Lord Reginald Whitmore looked older, grayer, but his bearing remained imperious. His traveling suit, though dust-covered, spoke of Boston tailoring and expense. He surveyed the Apache camp with the same expression he used when inspecting livestock, calculating, dismissive, already determining value and finding it wanting. The Apache warriors formed their own line, weapons visible but not raised. Naichi stepped forward, every inch the chief, his dignity a stark contrast to the military's aggressive posturing. The captain, a weathered man with sun-damaged skin, presented papers with official seals. "Lord Whitmore comes under federal authority," the captain announced. "He seeks conference regarding his daughter, Margaret Whitmore, placed here 5 months past." Naichi's expression remained neutral, though Margaret saw the tension in his shoulders. "Lord Whitmore is known to us. We will counsel." Her father's gaze swept the assembled Apache, pausing when it found Margaret. For a moment, His composed mask slipped, revealing shock that quickly transformed to disgust. She stood among the Apache women, wearing doeskin and beads, her skin sun-darkened, her hair loose and adorned with feathers cornflower had woven that morning. Everything about her appearance screamed her transformation. "Margaret," he said, the name sharp as breaking glass. "Come here immediately." 5 months ago, she would have obeyed without thought, muscle memory of 23 years pulling her forward. Now she remained still, feeling Cornflower's hand rest supportively on her back. "We should speak privately, Father," she said in English, then added in Apache, "This concerns the whole community." Whitmore's face darkened at the foreign words. "You will speak English, and you will come here now." Nietzsche intervened smoothly. "Council meets in the center. All are welcome to speak, including Miss Margaret." They gathered in the ceremonial circle, Apache on one side, soldiers maintaining rigid formation on the other. Whitmore sat stiffly on the offered blanket, clearly appalled at sitting on the ground but unwilling to stand while others sat. Margaret positioned herself with the women, not between groups but clearly aligned with the Apache. "I've come to correct a mistake," Whitmore began without preamble. 5 months ago, in a moment of excessive frustration, I made a hasty decision. I've come to reclaim my daughter. "Reclaim," Margaret repeated softly. "Like lost property. You are my daughter. You belong with your own kind, not playing savage in the desert." His gaze traveled over her appearance with revulsion. "Look at yourself. You've gone completely native, like an animal. Your skin is ruined, your hair wild. You smell of smoke and sweat instead of proper perfume." "I smell of honest work," Margaret replied, finding strength she didn't know existed. "Of medicine herbs I gather, bread I help bake, babies I deliver." "Babies you?" Whitmore's face went purple. "You've been consorting with these people. Have you no shame at all?" "I'm a medicine woman," she said clearly. "I help with births, treat illness, teach children. I have purpose here." Whitmore turned to Nietzsche, his tone shifting to false reasonableness. "Chief, I thank you for housing my daughter during our unfortunate disagreement. I'm prepared to compensate your people generously for her upkeep. Blankets, beef, even rifles for hunting." "She is not trade goods to be bought back," Nietzsche said, his controlled tone more threatening than any shout. "She came as person, stays as person, leaves only if she chooses." "Chooses?" Whitmore laughed bitterly. "She's a woman, and my daughter besides. She has no legal standing to choose anything." Guayaquil's, he pulled documents from his coat. "These papers from the Bureau of Indian Affairs state that any white woman held in Indian camps can be retrieved by male relatives for her own protection and moral salvation." The captain shifted uncomfortably. Margaret could see he didn't want to be here, enforcing civilian demands that complicated military-Apache relations. But orders were orders. "Margaret," her father's voice shifted to paternal concern that fooled no one. "I've arranged everything. The Carmelite sisters in Santa Fe have agreed to accept you. You'll have a quiet life of contemplation and service, away from society's judgment. I'll tell everyone you died of fever, a tragic but respectable end. You can live peacefully, without the burden of trying to fit into a world that will never accept you as you are." The words were honeyed poison, offering escape but at the cost of erasure. She would disappear into convent walls, her father freed from embarrassment, her existence reduced to a convenient lie. Around her, the Apache women had moved closer, forming a subtle but unmistakable protective circle. Young Flower translated rapidly for those who didn't speak English. Cornflower's hand found Margaret's, squeezing support. "And if I refuse?" Margaret asked. Whitmore's mask dropped completely. "Then I invoke federal law. These soldiers will remove you by force if necessary. You think these savages will risk their treaty for you, risk food shipments, risk military retaliation?" He leaned forward. How many of their children will starve next winter because you wanted to play at being Apache? The threat landed like a physical blow. Margaret saw the calculation in Apache faces they would fight for her. She knew that, but at what cost the fragile peace Nietzsche had built, the security it provided, all could shatter because of her. Nietzsche stood slowly, his movement drawing every eye. Lord Whitmore speaks of treaties and laws. Let me speak of Apache law. When someone comes to us seeking shelter, we provide it. When they prove themselves through service and courage, they become family. Margaret Whitmore arrived as your discarded daughter, but soft hands. He used her Apache name deliberately, has earned her place among us. He walked to where Margaret sat, extending his hand to help her rise. She stood beside him, aware of the statement it made. She has saved Apache lives, Nietzsche continued. Delivered our children, healed our sick, shared her knowledge to help us survive. She has learned our ways, speaks our language, carries our trust. By Apache law, she is one of us unless she chooses otherwise. Savage law means nothing to the United States government. Whitmore spat. Perhaps. But forcing her removal could be seen as violation of our treaty agreements regarding internal tribal matters. Nietzsche's smile was sharp. I think your bureau would prefer to avoid such complications. The captain cleared his throat. Lord Whitmore, the lady appears to be here voluntarily. Unless she states otherwise, she's been brainwashed. Look at her. Whitmore stood abruptly, advancing on Margaret. You were pathetic before, but at least you were civilized. Now you're worse than pathetic. You're a race traitor, a white woman degrading herself among heathens. The words should have devastated her. Months ago, they would have. But Margaret had learned her worth wasn't determined by her father's approval. She stepped forward, meeting his rage with calm she didn't know she possessed. I was pathetic. Father, you made sure I knew it every day. Too large, too loud, too present. You taught me to hate myself so thoroughly that I believed disappearing was a kindness to the world. She switched to Apache for a moment, addressing the people who'd become her family, then back to English. These heathens taught me that worth isn't measured in pounds or appearance, but in service, wisdom, and love. Love. Whitmore's laugh was ugly. You think these savages love you? You're a novelty, a pet white woman they can parade as evidence of their civilization. When they tire of you, enough! Nietzsche's voice carried the authority of thunder. You insult my people in our own camp. You insult a woman we respect. Council is finished. Whitmore's face went from purple to white. This isn't over. I'll return with more soldiers, with legal writs that even your treaty can't override. He looked at Margaret with pure venom. You have 3 days to come to your senses. After that, I'll have you removed whether it starts a war or not. He stormed toward his wagon, then turned back. Your mother would be appalled at what you've become. Margaret felt the words pierce old wounds, but before she could respond, Cornflower spoke in broken but clear English. Her mother would see daughter strong, helping others, loved by many. Mother would be proud. Whitmore left in a cloud of dust and fury, his escort clearly relieved to be departing. As the convoy disappeared, the camp erupted in discussion. Some warriors wanted to prepare for battle. Others suggested moving camp immediately. Through it all, Margaret stood frozen, the weight of decision crushing. Come, Nietzsche said quietly, leading her away from the crowd to the teaching rock. They sat in silence as the sun reached its zenith, the desert heat shimmering across the landscape. He'll do it, Margaret finally said. He'll bring the army. Claim I'm being held against my will. People will die because of me. People die anyway. Question is what they die for. Nietzsche picked up a piece of quartz, turning it so light refracted through its facets. You could go with him. Prevent bloodshed. Is that what you want? I want you to choose freely, not from fear or obligation. He set down the stone, taking her hands instead. Whatever you decide, know this: you've already changed us. Your 3 sisters planting might save our crops. Your medicine knowledge has saved lives. Your teaching gives our children tools for the changing world. Even if you left tomorrow, soft hands would live in our memory as blessing, not burden. That night, Margaret sat in her wickiup, her mother's mirror in her hands. The silver was tarnished now, the surface clouded, but she could still see her reflection Apache dress, feathered hair, sun-strengthened features, but more than physical changes. She saw something in her eyes that had never been there before: self-recognition, self-respect, self-love. 3 days to decide between erasure and war, between her father's shame and her chosen family's safety. 3 days to determine whether the woman she'd become was worth the price others might pay for her freedom. Outside, she heard the camp settling into uneasy sleep. Extra guards posted against her father's threatened return. These people who owed her nothing had given her everything: dignity, purpose, love. Could she risk their lives for her happiness? But as she lay down, still clutching the mirror, she heard Nietzsche's words again: choose freely, not from fear. For the first time in her life, she had real choice. The question was whether she had the courage to make it. Dawn painted the desert in shades of rose and gold as Margaret stood before the ceremonial fire, wearing the most elaborate dress the Apache women had ever created. Through the night, they had worked together, adding beads, shells, and sacred symbols to her spring festival dress, transforming it into something worthy of the declaration she was about to make. Eagle feathers adorned her hair, and around her neck hung White Shell's medicine bundle alongside her mother's pearl necklace, 2 worlds united in one woman. The entire camp had gathered before sunrise, forming a circle that spoke of unity and protection. Nietzsche stood with the war chiefs, his face revealing nothing of the conversation they'd shared the night before, when he'd formally asked for her decision. The scouts had reported her father's approach, 50 soldiers this time, with official wagons bearing government seals and what looked like legal documents enough to paper the desert. Margaret had spent 3 days in contemplation, seeking wisdom from the desert itself. She'd climbed to the sacred cave where Apache women went for visions, fasted as White Shell instructed, and waited for clarity. It came not as thunder but as whisper, her mother's voice on desert wind, saying simply, "Choose love, my daughter, choose life." Now, as drums began their solemn rhythm, Margaret stepped into the circle's center. She spoke first in Apache, her voice carrying across the silent gathering. "My people, for you are my people now. I stand before you not as white eyes traded for peace, but as soft hands who has found her true home. The desert has taught me strength. You have taught me worth. I choose to remain, whatever comes." She repeated the words in English for the soldiers who were just cresting the ridge, her father's wagon prominent among them. Let them hear her decision before demands were made or threats issued. The Apache responded with a sound that was neither war cry nor celebration but something deeper: acceptance, support, solidarity. Cornflower stepped forward, placing a blanket around Margaret's shoulders, the gesture stating louder than words, "This woman is under our protection." Lord Whitmore's convoy entered the camp like an invading army, soldiers forming rigid lines with rifles prominent though not yet raised. Her father descended from his wagon wearing his finest coat, medals from some purchased honorific gleaming on his chest. Behind him, men in dark suits carried leather portfolios bulging with documents. "I've brought federal marshals," Whitmore announced without preamble, "and writs from 3 judges demanding the return of my daughter for her own moral protection. You will surrender her immediately or face the consequences." The captain from 3 days ago was notably absent, replaced by a younger, harder man who looked eager for conflict. Margaret recognized the type, fresh from Eastern Military Academy, hungry for glory, seeing Apache as obstacles to manifest destiny rather than people. "Father," Margaret said, stepping forward with dignity that came from finally knowing her worth, "before you invoke your laws and writs, hear me. I'll hear nothing from a daughter who's forgotten her race, her class, and her Christian duty." Whitmore snarled. "Captain Morrison, retrieve my daughter." "Wait." Margaret's voice carried such authority that the captain actually hesitated. She reached into her medicine bundle and withdrew something that caught morning light, her mother's wedding ring, the one piece of jewelry she'd kept through everything. "This ring belonged to a woman who understood love," she said, walking slowly toward her father. "Mother wore it through 24 years of marriage, through your infidelities, your cruelties, your systematic destruction of her spirit. She died believing she was inadequate, that if she could just become small enough, perfect enough, you might love her again." Whitmore's face went white. "How dare you speak of your mother?" "I speak of her because I finally understand what killed her. Not wasting sickness, but wasting sorrow. You convinced her she was worthless, just as you tried to convince me." Margaret held out the ring. "Take this back. It belongs to your world, where women disappear themselves for men's comfort, where worth is measured in pounds and propriety." Her father recoiled from the offered ring as if it were a serpent. "Keep your dramatics. Captain, do your duty." Captain Morrison stepped forward, but Nietzsche and his warriors moved as well, creating a human wall between Margaret and the soldiers. The moment balanced on a knife's edge, violence threatening to explode. "Captain Morrison," Margaret called out, her voice steady. "I am 23 years old, of sound mind, here of my own free will. I ask you, under what law can you remove an adult woman who chooses to remain where she is?" The captain looked uncertain, glancing at the federal marshals. One of them, older and clearly uncomfortable, cleared his throat. "Lord Whitmore's claim rests on laws regarding the protection of white women from savage influence. However, if the woman demonstrates clear mental capacity and voluntary residence, then observe." Margaret switched to Apache, speaking rapidly and fluently about the morning's weather patterns, the medicinal properties of nearby plants, the proper preparation of willow bark for fever. She switched to English, quoting from her mother's Bible, then back to Apache, singing a healing song White Shell had taught her. "I speak 2 languages, practice medicine, teach children, contribute to this community. Can a woman under savage influence demonstrate such clarity?" Whitmore's rage was volcanic. "You choose these heathens over your own blood, over civilization. I choose respect over shame. Father, I choose love over duty. I choose a life where my worth isn't measured by my size or my silence, but by my service and my heart." She stood taller, feeling the support of her Apache family radiating like heat. "You taught me I was worthless. They taught me I was wrong." "Then you're dead to society," Whitmore shouted. "No decent white person will acknowledge you. You'll die here, forgotten, your name erased from our family records. I've been dead to society since Mother died, and I grew too large for your comfort. The difference is, now I'm alive for the first time." Margaret pulled the leather thong over her head, removing her mother's pearl necklace, the last tie to her old life. "Give this to whatever young lady you eventually buy to replace the son you never had. Tell her it belonged to a woman who knew her worth too late." She pressed both ring and necklace into her father's unwilling hands. He stared at the jewelry as if seeing ghosts, his carefully constructed authority crumbling. "Your mother," he said hoarsely, "would be appalled. My mother would weep with joy to see me loved." Margaret gestured to the Apache surrounding her. "She would see me teaching children who call me auntie. She would see me saving lives with medicine knowledge. She would see me dancing with abandon instead of hiding behind curtains. She would see her daughter choosing happiness over propriety, and she would celebrate." The elderly federal marshal stepped forward. "Lord Whitmore, the lady has made her position clear. She appears mentally sound and physically unharmed. We have no legal grounds to remove her against her will." "No legal grounds?" Whitmore's voice cracked. "She's consorting with savages. She's living with a sovereign people under treaty protection," the marshal corrected, clearly wanting this mission to end. "Unless she requests removal or shows signs of coercion, our authority ends here." Captain Morrison looked relieved. Despite his ambition, starting a war over a domestic dispute would end his career, not make it. He ordered his men to stand down, though they maintained formation. Whitmore stood abandoned in the circle's center, his authority evaporated, his threats empty. He looked older suddenly, smaller. A man whose only power had come from others' fear of his wealth and position. Here, in the desert, among people who measured worth differently, he was nothing. "You'll regret this," he said to Margaret, but the words lacked conviction. "When they tire of their pet white woman, when you're old and alone, I'll be surrounded by family I chose and who chose me." Margaret's voice held no anger now, only pity. "Go home, father. Commission a portrait of the daughter you wanted instead of the one you had. Tell your society friends whatever story soothes your pride. But know this, I forgive you." The words seemed to break something in Whitmore. He turned without another word, clutching the jewelry like anchors to a drowning man, and climbed into his wagon. The convoy departed in considerably less formation than they'd arrived, dust swirling in their wake. As the last soldier disappeared over the ridge, the camp erupted, not in war cries but in celebration. Women embraced Margaret, men nodded their approval, children danced around her legs. She had chosen them over everything her birth promised, and they would never forget. Nietzsche approached through the crowd, his dignity intact but his eyes showing deep emotion. He spoke in Apache, loud enough for all to hear. "Soft Hands has proven herself through courage greater than any warriors. She faced her past and chose her future. She stood against powerful men and did not bend. She chose us. And now I ask, will the people accept my formal request to court this woman as wife to your chief?" The response was immediate and unanimous. Approval shouted. Drums beaten. Songs begun. Cornflower approached with tears streaming down her weathered face, carrying something wrapped in soft deer hide. "This was Nietzsche's mother's," she said, revealing an elaborate necklace of turquoise, silver, and sacred shells. "She was great chief's wife, wise woman, bridge between peoples. She would want Soft Hands to wear it." As Cornflower placed the necklace around Margaret's neck, the weight of it felt like acceptance, like belonging, like home. The sunrise had become full morning, desert heat beginning to build, but Margaret felt only warmth that came from within. "You chose freely," Nietzsche said softly, taking her hands as the celebration continued around them. "Not from fear or obligation, but from love." "I chose myself," Margaret replied. "And in choosing myself, I chose you, this place, these people. I chose life." Whiteshell began the blessing chant, her ancient voice carrying across the desert. Others joined, the rhythm building, creating something that was neither purely Apache nor European but something new, like the three sisters growing stronger together in the field, like Margaret herself, transformed by confluence of cultures into someone entirely her own. The woman who'd arrived 5 months ago as discarded property was gone. In her place stood Soft Hands, medicine woman, teacher, chosen daughter of the Apache, future wife to a chief who saw her worth when she couldn't see it herself. She was no longer between worlds, but had created her own world from the best of both. As the blessing song reached its crescendo, an eagle circled overhead, its cry piercing and free. Margaret watched it soar, understanding finally what Nietzsche had meant about eagles seeing truth from great heights. From up there, boundaries that seemed so solid, between races, between worlds, between who she was and who she could be, dissolved into the greater truth of the desert that everything was connected. That strength came from community. That love transcended all artificial borders. She was home. She was. The wedding took place beneath a canopy of stars, with the full moon casting silver light across the desert landscape. Margaret stood in a dress that told the story of her transformation, Apache doeskin decorated with her mother's lace, beadwork patterns that incorporated both morning glories and sacred symbols, eagle feathers woven with white silk ribbons from her trunk. She was neither Apache nor Boston lady, but something entirely new, something entirely herself. Nietzsche wore his finest ceremonial clothing, turquoise and silver gleaming against dark skin, his bearing that of both warrior and peacemaker. The ceremony itself defied convention, mixing Apache blessing ways with passages from Margaret's mother's Bible, creating something that honored both traditions while being enslaved to neither. Whiteshell led the Apache portions, her ancient voice calling on spirits of the four directions to witness this union. Margaret and Nietzsche walked clockwise around the sacred fire, their hands joined, while the medicine woman scattered pollen and sage. The ritual was older than memory, connecting them to countless generations who had pledged themselves beneath these same stars. When Whiteshell finished, Margaret opened her mother's Bible to Corinthians, reading the passage about love in a clear voice. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. The words, so familiar from childhood, took new meaning here. This was love without conditions, without shame, without the need to diminish oneself. Cornflower presented the wedding gifts, blankets woven by the women, tools crafted by the men, and most precious of all, a cradle board decorated with hopes for future children. The celebration feast lasted until dawn, with dancing that mixed Apache traditional steps with movements Margaret taught from English country dances, creating something joyful and absurd and perfectly theirs. 5 years passed like flowing water, each season deepening Margaret's roots in her chosen soil. The three sisters' garden had saved that first harsh summer, the corn-bean-squash combination conserving enough water to produce a harvest when traditional fields withered. By the second year, the entire camp had adopted the method, and word spread to other Apache groups. Margaret became known not just as Soft Hands the medicine woman, but as the one who brought the gift of survival. Her medical practice grew as well. She maintained detailed journals, documenting Apache remedies alongside European medicines, finding remarkable overlaps and unexpected innovations. When whooping cough threatened the children, she combined Apache sweat lodge treatments with time steam inhalations her mother had used, saving every child who fell ill. The combination proved more effective than either treatment alone. The small wickiup she'd first occupied had been replaced by a proper dwelling near the center of camp, befitting the chief's wife and primary medicine woman. Shelves held precious glass bottles of tinctures, bundles of dried herbs, and her growing collection of medical journals, some ordered from Eastern suppliers who never knew they were shipping to an Apache camp, others handwritten recordings of Apache knowledge that had never been documented. On this particular morning, 5 years after her wedding, Margaret sat with her daughter in the teaching circle, the same spot where she'd first learned to make fire with yucca stalks. Emma Running Deer, 4 years old with her mother's green eyes and her father's proud cheekbones, practiced grinding corn with the miniature metate Grandfather Crow had carved for her. "Tell me again about the eagles, Mama," Emma said, in the fluid mix of Apache and English that had become the family's private language. Margaret pointed to the pair circling overhead, the same couple that nested in the canyon walls each spring. "Eagles mate for life, little one. They see truth from great heights, understanding patterns we cannot perceive from the ground. Like how you and Papa see our people's future." The perception startled Margaret, though it shouldn't have. Emma had inherited both parents' intelligence along with their stubborn streaks. "Yes, exactly like that. We see that Apache ways and new knowledge must blend to survive, like the three sisters growing stronger together." Emma abandoned the grinding stone, her attention caught by something else. A trunk being unloaded from a supply wagon. Margaret recognized it immediately, her original trunk from Boston, the one she'd thought lost when her father departed in rage. The wagon driver, a weathered man who supplied the camp monthly, approached with an envelope. Package came to Fort Buchanan, addressed to Margaret, wife of Chief Nietzsche. Took some doing to figure out that meant here. Margaret's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside, her father's solicitor's neat handwriting informed her of Lord Whitmore's death 3 months prior. He'd left her nothing in his will, that had gone to distant cousins, but he'd instructed this trunk be sent to her with a single line, "Your mother would have wanted you to have these." Inside the trunk, wrapped in tissue paper that crumbled at her touch, lay her mother's things, her garden journals, filled with pressed flowers and careful notes about growing seasons, her needlework, including an unfinished baby blanket Margaret recognized, begun when her mother first suspected pregnancy, never completed after the third miscarriage. At the very bottom, a packet of letters tied with faded ribbon. Margaret opened them carefully, finding her mother's correspondence with her own mother, Margaret's grandmother she'd never met. The letters revealed a woman Margaret had never known, adventurous, funny, determined to marry for love despite family objections. One line stood out, written just after Margaret's birth. "She is perfect. Mother, large and loud and absolutely perfect. I will teach her to never apologize for taking up space in this world." "Why are you crying, Mama?" Emma asked, climbing into her lap with the natural confidence of a cherished child. "These are letters from your grandmother you never met. She loved me very much, even if she couldn't always show it the way she wanted." Emma studied the photograph that had fallen from between letters. Margaret's mother as a young woman, vibrant and smiling, before years of her father's coldness had diminished her. "She looks like you, but sadder." "She didn't have what I have," Margaret said, holding her daughter close. "She didn't have a place where she could be herself, people who valued her strength, a love that celebrated rather than diminished her." "Why did grandfather send you away?" Emma asked suddenly. The question Margaret had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. Margaret considered her answer carefully. "He thought I was broken because I didn't fit the shape he expected, like trying to force an eagle into a sparrow's nest. But sending me away was the greatest gift he ever gave me, because it brought me here, to your father, to our people, to you." Emma seemed to consider this seriously. "So sometimes bad things are actually good things wearing disguises. Sometimes, little eagle. Sometimes what seems like ending is actually beginning." That evening, the camp gathered for storytelling. Margaret had become one of the primary keepers of stories, teaching Apache children their own history while weaving in tales from other traditions. Tonight, she told the story of the three sisters, but not as agricultural instruction. She told it as metaphor, three different peoples learning to support each other, growing stronger through connection than they ever could alone. Naichi sat beside her, their second child visible beneath her dress, due before winter. This pregnancy felt different from Emma's, easier, more certain. She knew what her body could do now, trusted its strength. Whiteshell, though growing frail, had already proclaimed it would be a son. A bridge builder like his parents. As the fire burned low, old Standing Bear spoke. He'd been one of the most skeptical when she'd first arrived, slow to trust the white woman in their midst. Now he stood with difficulty, his voice still strong despite his years. 5 winters ago, we thought we traded for peace by accepting a burden. Instead, Creator sent us a gift disguised as sacrifice. Soft Hands has saved our children, preserved our knowledge while bringing new wisdom, shown us that strength comes not from pure blood but from pure heart." He raised his walking stick toward her in salute. "Your mother's letters speak truth. You were always perfect. We just had to wait for you to see it." Later, in their dwelling, Margaret showed Naichi the letters and journals. He studied them carefully, particularly the garden journal with its meticulous observations. "Your mother was scientist, like you," he observed. "Recording, testing, learning. This knowledge didn't die with her. It lives in you, in what you teach Emma, in the medicines you create." "I wish she could have known this life," Margaret said softly. "Known that women could be valued for their strength, their knowledge, their wholeness, rather than their ability to disappear." "She knows," Naichi said with certainty. "Through you, she knows." That night, Margaret dreamed of her mother, not the diminished woman of her later years, but the vibrant girl from the photographs. They stood together on the teaching rock, looking out over the desert, now green with successful Three Sisters plantings. "I did it, Mama," Dream Margaret said. "I found where I belong." "No, "My darling," her mother replied, voice warm as summer rain. "You created where you belong. You took broken pieces from two worlds and made something whole, something new, something magnificent." When she woke, dawn was breaking over the desert mountains, painting them rose and gold. Emma lay between her and Nietzsche, having crept in during the night as she often did. Through the dwelling opening, Margaret could see the camp stirring to life, women beginning their morning tasks, men preparing for a hunt, children's voices rising like birdsong. She thought of the woman who'd arrived here in terror nearly 6 years ago, certain of her worthlessness, existing only as currency in her father's transaction. That woman had died, not in tragedy, but in transformation. In her place stood soft hands, medicine woman, teacher, mother, wife, bridge between worlds. The eagles called from their canyon nest, greeting the morning sun. Margaret rose carefully, not wanting to wake her family, and stepped outside. The desert spread before her in all its harsh beauty, no longer foreign but fundamental to who she'd become. Cornflower emerged from her dwelling, older now but still strong, still the backbone of the camp. She smiled at Margaret, the expression saying everything without words. They stood together, watching the sunrise, two women from different worlds who'd found sisterhood in shared strength. "Your daughter will be great, woman," Cornflower said in her improved English. "She has your courage, Nietzsche's wisdom, but most important, she has both worlds in her heart, fear of neither." "She'll need both," Margaret replied. "The world is changing faster than any of us expected." "Yes, but we adapt. Like the three sisters, we grow stronger together than apart." As the camp fully woke, Margaret moved into her day, checking on a pregnant woman, teaching letters to eager children, preparing medicines for the coming winter. But she moved differently now than she had in Boston. No longer trying to shrink, but taking up exactly the space she needed, no more, no less. The trunk from her father sat in the corner of her dwelling, its contents slowly being integrated into her new life. Her mother's garden journals would help improve their planting. The needlework would teach Emma and other girls a different kind of artistry. The letters would remind her that love could survive even in hostile soil, waiting for the right conditions to bloom. That evening, as purple shadows stretched across the desert and cooking fires sent smoke spiraling toward stars, Margaret stood with her family, her community, her chosen people. Nietzsche's hand rested on her growing belly. Emma danced with the other children, and the eagles circled overhead in their eternal dance. She was no longer between worlds, but had become a world unto herself, complete, worthy, and finally, truly, home. You know, friend, as I share Margaret's story with you, I find myself thinking about the families we're born into and the families we choose. Sometimes I wonder if the greatest gift we can receive is rejection from those who cannot see our worth, because it forces us to find those who can. Margaret's father thought he was discarding damaged goods, but he was actually planting a seed in soil where it could finally grow. The Apache didn't just give her shelter. They gave her permission to exist fully, to take up space, to be substantial in every sense of the word. And in return, she gave them her knowledge, her service, her whole heart. That's what real family does, isn't it? They see you not as you've been taught to see yourself, but as you truly are. They celebrate your strength instead of demanding you diminish it. The gratitude Margaret felt wasn't just for being accepted. It was for finally understanding that she'd always been worthy of acceptance. Sometimes we must travel far from where we started to find where we belong. Sometimes the cruelest gift becomes the greatest blessing. And sometimes, just sometimes, the family that chooses you becomes more real than the one you were born into.